in this class I'm going to explain the capital structure of joint stock company, and in that different types of shares and debentures. Okay, the last classes in the last classes I have explained the memorandum of association, articles of association, articles of association, and prospectus. The last classes I have explained memorandum of association, articles of association, and prospectus. Okay, so we already know about all these things. A prospectus is nothing but an invitation to the general public. Okay, a prospectus is nothing but an invitation to the general public to invest the shares in the joint stock company, right? So the companies issues different types of shares. eh? So a general public may purchase different kinds of shares, that is an equity share or a preference share. Okay, or he may purchase a debenture. Okay, so then actually the companies requires three different kinds of capitals. The companies requires three different kinds of capitals. But one is, so the most important problem of a promoter is securing finance. It is nothing but getting finance, procuring the capital. So here the finance is the lifeblood of any industry. Finance is the lifeblood of any industry. A joint stock company, we already know, a joint stock company needs large capital. A joint stock company needs huge capital, large capital. A joint stock company needs large capital. Okay, every industrial concern requires two kinds of capital. Generally, any industry, any type of business organization needs two kinds of capital. Okay, fixed capital and working capital. Here, okay. So securing finance is the blood of any industry. Securing finance is the most important. It is the most important step in any industry. Okay, generally a joint stock company needs huge capital. A joint stock company needs large amount of capital needed. So this is the most important problem or the most important function of a promoter, to arrange the capital or to secure finance, to arrange the capital for different needs. Here the different needs is nothing but different requirements is only two kinds of requirements. One is fixed capital, another one is working capital. Okay, fixed capital and working capital requirements will be there. Fixed capital and working capital requirement will be there. Okay, so here every industrial requires two kinds of capital, fixed and working capital. So here the fixed capital is an amount required to purchase permanent assets. Okay, what is the purpose of fixed capital? The fixed capital is required to purchase permanent assets. Like land machinery land and building. Okay, so the amount required to purchase permanent assets. Okay, for example, plant and machinery, land and building. These are purchased uh, only one time throughout the life of the company. Okay, throughout the life of the company, these assets are purchased only one time. The machinery is purchased. Okay, so the building is purchased. So these are all comes under the fixed assets category. These are all comes under fixed assets category. So these are purchased throughout the life of the company only one time, and the repairs or maintenance will be there after coming after the usage of these things. The repairings or maintenance will be there. Okay, so it is for this purpose long term or medium term capital is required. For this purpose long term or medium term capital is required. So for example, the industries such as hydroelectricity, shipbuilding, railways requires huge fixed capital. Okay, so here some of the industries, for example, some of the industries like hydroelectricity. So this is a one type of industry. The hydroelectricity is one type of industry. This industry requires huge amount of capital. Okay, huge amount of capital. And one more industry, that is shipbuildings or railways. Okay, like that, so many industries requires huge amount of capital, huge amount of fixed capital. Okay, so here generally the companies requires two kinds of capital: fixed capital and working capital. Generally the companies requires two kinds of capital. Generally the companies requires two kinds of capital: fixed capital and working capital. Okay, so the amount required to purchase the amount required to purchase permanent assets the amount required to purchase permanent assets, for example plant. Okay, plant and machinery. So plant and machinery is a fixed asset. It is needed to produce something. Okay, it is needed to produce something. So and building, land. Okay, land, building, this is comes under a fixed fixed asset. Okay, so for this purpose fixed capital is required. Fixed capital is required. This is called as long term or medium term capital. This is also called as long term or medium term capital, right? So then next, fixed capital depends upon the nature and size of the industry. Fixed capital depends upon the nature and size of the industry. If the industry is big, if the organization of the industry activities organization is big, or the activities of the industry is big, then they need large amount of fixed capital. Then they need large amount of fixed capital. So the requirement of the fixed capital is depends upon the nature and size of industry. Okay, the fixed capital requirement the fixed capital requirement depends upon the nature and size of the industry. If the industry is small, then fixed capital is less. Fixed capital requirement is somewhat less. If the industry is big, the production process is big, the production process is big, or the activities of the industry is big. Okay, then the fixed capital requirements, then the fixed capital requirement is huge. Okay, so generally the industries procure the fixed capital from the following sources. Generally the industries procure the fixed capital from the following sources: by issue of shares, by issue of debentures, by the way of loans from banks and other financial institutions. By issue of shares, debentures, and by way of loans from the banks and other financial institutions. Okay, issue of shares, debentures, and by the way of loans from banks and other financial institution. Okay, working capital. Working capital, the amount required for a company to purchase raw materials. The working capital is the amount required for a company to purchase raw materials, or make day-to-day payments. Make day-to-day payments such as wages, salaries, rents, etc. Working capital requires working capital requires working capital requires for purchase of raw material and day-to-day business activities, for the purchase of raw materials and day-to-day business activities okay. So here we know up to now the companies requires fixed capital and working capital. Okay, fixed capital and working capital. Fixed capital is to purchase fixed capital purpose is to purchase fixed capital purpose is to purchase plant fixed asset, that is plant and machinery, building, etc. And the working capital the working capital the working capital that is for purchasing raw materials or making day-to-day payments such as wages, salaries, rents, etc. Make day-to-day payments such as wages, salaries, rents, etc. Okay, so the company requires a large working capital where the process of production is long. The companies requires large working capital. Okay, so large working capital, huge working capital. So here the company is big, the company is big, the company requires large fixed capital as well as large working capital. The company requires a large fixed capital and large working capital. Here the companies requires large fixed capital as well as large working capital. Okay, so these large fixed capital and working capital are procured through by issue of the shares or debentures or from other financial institution. Okay, so the company requires large working capital where the process of production is long. The company is producing small items. Okay, then it is only the little bit, a little bit or somewhat small working capital is enough. Or if the company is producing or making cars, for example, making cars like an automobile industry. If the company is an automobile company, then the company is producing like cars, then this company requires large working capital. Because the production process is long, so that it requires large working capital. Okay, so the capital is also known as short-term capital since the funds are used for the short-term purpose. Okay, generally the capital if the capital is required for short-term funds, then it is for short-term purposes. Then these funds are used for short-term purposes. The capital is also known as short-term capital since these funds are used for short-term purposes. Okay, so here the companies requires fixed capital as well as working capital. Okay, so here up to now we got a point that the joint stock company or the company requires short-term fixed capital and working capital. Okay, so we can call it as a short-term capital also. So the company requires long-term capital, medium-term capital, short-term capital. The company requires long-term capital, medium-term capital, short-term capital. Generally a company requires medium-term, long-term and short-term capital. Okay, so long-term financial resources. So whatever the capital requirement for a company, that is a fixed capital or working capital, okay, so the companies require fixed capital for purchasing assets, building plant and machinery. Okay, and the working capital for the purpose of day-to-day business. Okay, working capital for the purpose of day-to-day business. Okay, these are all comes under either long term, medium term, or short term. Okay, this capital is used for long term, medium term, and short term. Okay, so for these two things, for working capital and for fixed capital and working capital, so the total company's capital is needed in three ways: long term, medium term, short term. Okay, for example, if you take that is working capital, so working capital means for day-to-day business. Okay, when the business is started, the company requires daily payments. Okay, the daily payments like wages, fuel, salaries. Okay, so and that is comes under a short-term capital resource. Okay, medium term capital, so term capital is already assets are purchased, already assets are building is construction completed, assets are purchased, the installation of that machinery, installation of machinery or raw material, like that comes under medium term. So that long term capital, that is purchasing of building, purchasing of machinery. Okay, that is comes under this long term capital. Okay, so the company's capital requirement broadly, the total company's capital requirements broadly classified into long term, fixed, medium term, and short term. Long term, medium term, short term. Here up to now we have already known that. So up to now we have discussed that the company the company's required capital, that is fixed capital and working capital. Okay, so this is this the for fixed capital and for working capital and fixed capital. Okay, these are requests that is comes under either long term, medium term, and short term capital. Okay, that is fixed capital or fixed capital comes under this long term, so medium term, short term, that is for working capital. Okay, so like that the companies requires long term capital, medium term capital, and short term capital. Okay, long term, medium term, and short term capital. So long term financial resources. Okay, long term financial resources, long term capital is the capital required for longer period of the company. The long term capital requirement or the long term capital is the capital required for long period of the company. Long term capital is the capital required for longer period of, of the company. Long term capital is the capital required for longer period of the company, so usually for more than 10 years, Okay, so here before this one we have already discussed. The point is the company requires fixed as well as working capital. Okay, so the fixed capital is for the purpose of purchasing a building and machinery. Okay, like that, for procuring fixed assets, Okay, so the working capital is for raw material, purchasing raw material or day-to-day business, to meet the day-to-day business expenditure. Right, here the long-term financial resources, the long-term financial resources are required to procure that is fixed assets, long-term needs, that is fixed assets. Okay, fixed assets like land building and machinery. Long-term capital is the capital required for longer period of the company, that is for usually for more than 10 years, usually it is for more than 10 years. Okay, so for what purpose? For acquisition or build up of fixed assets, fixed assets like land, building, and machinery. Land, building, and machinery. The next, shares are the best best uh, shares are the best source for long term financial resources. Shares are the best source for the long term financial resources. So how the companies will procure this long term capital? The long term capital procured with by issuing shares. The shares are the best source. best source. The shares are the best source for long-term financial resources. For long-term financial resources, the shares are repaid only on the winding up of the company. The shares are repaid only on the winding up of the company. The share capital can be raised or lowered according to the increasing needs of the company. Okay, shareholders will be paid dividend only whenever there are profits. Okay, only whenever there are profits. Whenever there are profits. Okay, so up to now we know that the companies requires fixed capital as well as working capital. The companies requires fixed capital as well as working capital. Okay, the fixed capital or long term needs. Fixed capital comes under to procure long term needs. Okay, so how this long term capital will be procured by the companies? The companies will procure this long term capital by issuing shares. So the shares are the best source. The shares are the best source for long term financial resources. The shares are the best source for long term financial resources. Shares are repaid only on the winding up of company. Once the shares are issued, and the public or the shareholder who purchase the shares are called as shareholders. Who purchases the shares are issued to the general public. The shares are issued to the general public. The public who purchases the shares are called as the shareholders. Okay, once the share is purchased, once the people purchase the shares, that is comes under a long term financial resources of a company. The long term financial resources of a company. The shares are repaid only on the winding up of the company. Okay, so generally the people who purchase the shares will get a dividend out of the profits of the company. Okay, it depends upon the profits of the company. Okay, if the company gets more and more profit, the shareholders can get more and more dividend. Okay, there is no limit or there is no some fixed criteria to give only this amount as dividend to the shareholders. It depends upon the profits of the company. The company gets more profits. If the company gets more profits, they will get more dividend. The company gets more profits, then they will get more dividend. And once shares are purchased, uh, so the shares cannot be repaid. The share principal or the share amount cannot be repaid. It can only repaid on the winding up of the company. It can only repaid on the winding up of the company. The share capital can be raised or lowered according to the increasing needs of the company. The share capital can be raised or lowered according to the increasing needs of the company. The share capital can be raised or lowered according to the increasing needs of the company. Shareholders will be paid dividends only whenever there are profits. So the company will issue shares to procure long term financial resources, to arrange long term financial resources. Okay, so once the people or shareholders purchases the shares, the share amount cannot be repayable. The share amount principal cannot be repayable back to the shareholders. Okay, only the dividend is paid to the shareholders. The dividend is depends upon the profits of the company. If the company gets more profits, the shareholders will get more amount as dividend. But the shares are repaid only on the winding up of the company. Okay, so shares are repaid only on the winding up of the company. So here shareholders will be paid dividend only when there are profits. Okay, if the company gets profits only the amount will be paid to the shareholders. The dividend is paid to the shareholders. If the company gets profits only, the share amount, the dividend is paid to the shareholders. The dividend amount paid to the shareholders. If the company gets losses, so it means that no dividend is paid to the shareholder. No dividend is paid to the shareholder, right? So here the point is, so the company issues shares to arrange long term financial resources. So once the shares is the shareholders purchases the shares who purchases, the people who purchase the shares are called as shareholders. Okay, once they invest in the company in the form of a share, that cannot be paid back. Only the dividend is paid to the shareholders. Okay, if the company gets profits only, the company gets profits only, then the dividend is paid to the shareholders. If the company get losses, then the dividend cannot be paid, then the dividend cannot be paid. Okay, so here the shares are different. Shares can be different categories. Shares can be different categories: preference shares, equity shares, deferred shares. Shares can be of different categories: preference shares, equity shares, deferred shares. Okay, shares are different types or different categories. Different types or different categories: preference shares, equity shares, and deferred shares. Then next, medium term financial resources. Medium term financial resources. Medium term financial resources. So medium term financial resources. The medium term requirements are generally for modernization of the equipment, repairs to fixed assets. The medium term capital requirements. The medium term requirements are generally for modernization of the equipment or repairs to fixed assets. Modernization. So already building is there, already machinery is there, and building is there, machinery is there. Okay, this is for the requirement of the medium term capital is requirement for modernization, for repairing the building, for repairing the building or maintenance of the building, or repairing the building, maintenance of the building. Okay, generally for modernization of the equipments, repairing to fixed assets. So the duration of this medium term capital generally is 5 to 10 years. That is 5 to 10 years. The long term capital is usually for more than 10 years. Usually for more than 10 years for the purchase of building machinery, for the purchase of building machinery, etc. The long term capital requirement is usually for more than 10 years. This is for the purchase of building and machinery, etc. Okay, so the second one, or the second next requirement is medium term capital requirement. So the medium term capital requirement is generally for modernization of the equipment, repair to fixed assets. Already building is there, 10 years completed, so some repairs to be needed. Already machinery is there, machinery is there, it is somewhat repairs are there to that fixed assets. Okay, so then next, the term of this medium term financial resources is, the duration is 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years is considered to be medium term. So after the period there may not be any need for the same. Money can be borrowed from suitable agencies for this purpose. Okay, the long term capital, uh, is procured, is arranged by issuing shares. There are different kinds of shares. By issuing shares, there are different kinds of shares: preference shares, equity shares, and deferred shares. Preference shares, equity shares, and deferred shares. So the medium term capital generally for modernization of the equipment, modernization of the equipment. So repairs to fixed assets, for example, modernization of the equipments and repairs to fixed assets like building machinery. The term is 5 to 10 years. The term is 5 to 10 years to be considered as medium term. 5 to 10 years is considered to be medium term. So money can be borrowed from any suitable agency for this purpose. Money can be borrowed from any suitable suitable agency for this purposes. For procuring this medium term capital, money can be suitable for any business terms. Then so here the medium term capital, for arranging this medium term capital, debentures are the suitable option. Debentures are the suitable option for medium term financial resources. Debentures are the suitable option for medium term financial resources. Debentures are the suitable term for medium term financial resources. So interest is paid regularly over the debentures. Interest is paid over regularly over the debentures. The burden of payment every year is known and limited. The burden of payment is every year known and limited. At the end of the period, the debentures are retired. The debentures are retired. Okay. So here debentures are the suitable option. Debentures are the suitable option for the medium term financial resources. Okay. So here the company issues debentures. The company issues debentures to arrange medium term financial medium term capital or medium term financial requirements. So for this purpose the company issued debentures. The debentures for the debenture, the people who purchases debentures are called as debenture holders. The people who purchases debentures are called as debenture holders. The people who purchases debentures are called as debenture holders. The people who purchases debentures are called as debenture holders, right? So they will get interest on debentures. They will get interest on debentures, right? So the shareholders will get dividend. Here the difference, we have to observe the difference here is, so the debenture holder will get interest and the shareholder will get dividend. Okay, shareholder will get a dividend, the debenture holders will get interest. Okay, debenture is a one kind of loan. The debenture amount, the interest on the debenture is paid regularly. The interest on the debenture is paid regularly. The interest on the debenture is paid regularly to the debenture holders. Okay, so if the company gets a profit or loss, no consideration. Okay, so but the debenture holders will get interest regularly on their debenture uh, purchased amount. Okay, so here the shareholders will get dividend only. The shareholder will get dividend only when the company gets a profit. When the company gets a profit, only the shareholder will get a dividend. But here the debenture holder will get interest, not dividend. Interest regularly. Okay, so the burden of payment every year is known and limited. The company, the directors or the management knows the burden of this interest or debenture amount. Okay, and finally at the end or expiry, the debenture holder will get the total amount. The debenture holder will get the total amount. Here the debenture is a one kind of loan. But to procure medium term capital. as well as short term capital also. We can say short term capital also, medium term capital and short term capital also. Okay. And the debenture shareholders are called as, there are we already see that there are different types of shares, that is equity shares, preference shares and deferred shares. Okay, so the preference shares are equity share, there is some differences between those preference equity and deferred shares that I will discuss in the next class. Okay, so what kind of share it may be, the shareholder will get dividend. The shareholders are called as the real owners of the company. The shareholders are the real owners of the company. The shareholders will get dividend on their share amount. Okay, if the company gets profit only, they'll get dividend. So that is for procuring or arranging long-term financial resources. Long-term financial resources. Okay, long-term financial resources. And the debenture is for the companies issues debenture to procure medium term financial resources. The companies will issue debenture to issue for medium term financial resources. Medium term financial resources. So the debenture is a one kind of loan. The debenture is a one kind of loan. The debenture is one kind of loan. Interest is paid regularly over the debentures. Interest is paid regularly over the debentures. The burden of payment is every year known and limited. Burden of payment is every year known and limited. Okay, every year known and limited. So at the end of the period, the debenture are retired. At the end of the at the end of the period, the debentures are retired. The debentures are retired. Debentures can be of different types. The debentures can be of different types. Registered debentures, bearer debentures, secured debentures, unsecured debentures, redeemable debentures, irredeemable debentures, convertible debentures. Debentures can be of different types. Registered, bearer, secured, unsecured, redeemable, convertible debentures. These are all the different kinds of debentures. Debentures issued by a company. These are all the different kinds of debentures issued by a company. Okay, so then non-convertible debentures, like that. So the types of debentures we discuss in the next class clearly about the different types of debentures. Each and every debenture we discuss in the next class. Okay, short term financial resources. The period of short term is between 6 months to 2 years. The period of short term is between 6 months to 2 years. The working capital requirement are met from the short term financial capital. So well, already we discussed that the companies requires fixed capital and working capital. The companies required fixed capital as well as the working capital. Okay, the companies requires fixed capital as well as working capital. So the short term capital requirement are met for the short term financial working capital requirements are met from the short term financial resources. The working capital requirements are met from the short term financial resources. The working capital requirements are met from the short term financial resources. The period of short term is between 6 months to 2 years. The period of short term is between 6 months to 2 years. The working capital requirement are met from the short term financial resource. The working capital requirements are payment towards wages, salaries, rents, etc. These are required for the normal and day-to-day functioning of the organization. These are required for the normal and day-to-day functioning of the organization. Okay, medium term, long term, medium term and short term. Okay, generally the companies requires two kinds of capital, fixed capital as well, and fixed capital and working capital. Okay, fixed capital for the purchase of building, machinery, etc. The working capital for the day-to-day business, for the day-to-day business for purchasing raw materials or wages, giving wages, salaries, day-to-day purchase. Okay, the long term, medium term, short term. So the long term, medium term comes under the fixed arranging of the fixed capital, fixed capital. The short term capital requirements are met from the short term financial, the working capital requirements are met from the short term financial resources. The working capital requirements are met from the short term financial resources. The working capital requirements are payment towards wages, salaries, rents, insurance, etc. The working capital requirements are payments towards wages, salaries, rent, etc. These are required for the normal day-to-day functioning of the organization. These are required for the normal day-to-day functioning of the organization. Okay, normal day-to-day functioning of the organization, right? So then next, loans or advances. Loans or advances from financial institution or general option. Public deposits is also another option. The public deposits are offered by reputed organization at a higher rate of than the market rate. Interest is paid regularly on the deposits. Okay, so the short term capital is procured in the form of loans and advances from the financial institution. The loans or advances from the financial institution are the general option. The loans or advances from the financial institution are the general option. Public deposits is also another option available. Public deposits is also another option is available. So the public deposits are offered by reputed organization at higher rate. Interest is paid regularly on the deposits. So for arranging this working capital or short-term capital requirement needs, the companies take loans or advances from other financial or commercial institutions, generally banks. Generally the banks will provide loans or advances to the companies to arrange this short-term capital needs or working capital requirements. Short-term capital needs or working capital requirement. So the public deposits are also by reputed by other organization higher market rate. Public deposits are also higher market rate. Interest is paid regularly on the deposits. Interest is paid regularly on the deposits. Okay, so here the companies arrange the capital. The companies requires two kinds of capital, that is fixed capital and working capital. Okay, so these fixed and working capital is broadly classified under three things, that is long term needs, medium term needs and short term needs. Okay, long term needs, medium term needs and short term needs. The long term needs, that is more than 10 years, medium term needs, that is 5 to 10 years in between, and the short term needs is below 2 years, uh, 2 years. Okay, the long term needs is for arranging building machinery, plant building machinery, purchasing of machinery. So for medium term capital requirement is medium term capital requirement in for example installation, maybe it installation or modernization, or repairs to the existing machinery, etc. And the short term capital requirement or short term needs are made for the working capital requirements. The working capital requirements. Okay, so the working capital is for day-to-day business activities. Purchasing raw materials or payment of this wages, salaries, fuel, rent, etc. That is comes under day to day, the expenditure for day to day business activities, right? So for this purpose, loans or advances, the companies will the companies takes loans or advances from the financial institution. Okay, so and the public deposit, generally the interest rate is high, uh, interest rate is high uh, compared to compared to other loans or advances or debentures. Okay, so debentures, right? So interest is paid regularly on the deposits. Interest is paid regularly on these deposits. Interest is paid regularly on these deposits. Okay, so here shares, different kinds of shares, and another source is debenture, different type of debentures, and another one is loans or advances from other financial institution, right? So the next summary. So in this class we have learned in this class we have learned so in this class we have learned the financial requirements of a company: long term, medium term, short term. Generally the capital is your fixed capital and working capital. Okay, so it is broadly classified into different three different requirements: long term, medium term, and short term. Long term, medium term, short term. Okay, so the requirements are met as follows: long term requirement by issuing shares, medium term requirements by issuing debentures, and the short term requirements by issuing loans or advances from financial institutions or short term deposits from the public. Loans and advances from financial institutions or short term deposits public from the public. So the financial requirements of a company may be long term, medium term, short term. The working capital or the capital structure or the financial requirements of a company is long term, medium term, short term. Long term, medium term, short term. So these requirements or the requirements are met as follows: long term shares. The long term requirements, the long term capital is arranged by issuing shares. The medium term capital is arranged by issuing debentures, and the short term capital is arranged by taking loans or advances from financial institution or short term deposits from the public. The shares who purchased the shares are called shares are nothing but the investment in the company. Shares are nothing but the investment in the company. The shares who purchased shares or the persons, the public who purchased shares are called as the shareholders or real owners of the company. Real owners of the company. The debentures. Debenture is also one kind of loan. Debenture is also one kind of loan. The interest on the debenture is paid regularly. The interest on the debenture is paid regularly. Okay, and the short-term loans for working capital purpose, the short term loans or advances from financial institution. Okay, so this will be arranged by taking loans or advances from the financial institution or short term deposits from the public or short term deposits from the public. Okay, so in this today's class I have explained the capital structure of a joint stock company. In this class I have explained the capital structure of a joint stock company, right? So fixed the companies, generally the companies requires fixed capital and working capital. So the fixed and working capital is the financial requirements. The financial requirements, this may be arranged, this may be broadly comes under this long term, medium term, short term. So the long term by issuing shares, the medium terms by issuing debentures, and the short term by taking advances or loans from the general public. Okay, so thank you.